The clinical, high-efficiency glare of our smart offices and minimalist workspaces does not soften. When the sun drops below the steel and glass horizons of our modern cities instead, it casts a stark, artificial brilliance over our desks and our minds, keeping our attention perpetually locked inside an infinite operational circuit. We sit behind massive dual monitors, our fingers resting lightly on keys that click with rapid mechanical precision, while our digital calendars stand tightly color-coded to the nearest 5-minute block. We track our key performance indicators. We monitor our optimization metrics, and we coordinate our workflows across automated channels that update in real time, completely insulated from the natural cycles of day and night. We have expertly built an environment where variance is eliminated, where spontaneity is viewed as an error, and where our human output is expected to match the unyielding velocity of our software platforms. Yet, if we tune our senses to the subtle undercurrent that hums beneath this flawlessly executed productivity, we can detect a cold, exhausting friction vibrating through our entire culture. It is the sound of an intricate clockwork engine running at maximum speed, its gears turning with frantic acceleration, entirely detached from any meaningful destination, consuming its own metal casing for fuel. If we close our eyes and allow our awareness to sink completely into the physical framework of our bodies in this immediate moment, we can measure the profound somatic tax this relentless velocity demands from our biology. There is a precise microphysical structure to our collective acceleration, a lingering static that hums just beneath our skin. We carry our need for constant achievement not as a conscious philosophy, but as an automated, rigid grid of physical bracing. Notice the rapid, electric vibration of adrenaline coursing through your forearms, an involuntary readiness to react to the next notification or assignment. Notice the subtle, continuous trembling in the tips of the fingers, a phantom echo of hours spent inputting data and managing digital assets. We handle our professional responsibilities, our personal development projects, and our domestic logistics entirely alone, and our bodies reflect this isolated combat through a permanent state of kinetic tension. Our breathing is rapid, shallow, and trapped completely within the high collarbones, a perpetual emergency rhythm that refuses to let the life force drop down to nourish the lower organs. We are perpetually running a fraction of a second ahead of our immediate experience, holding our breath, waiting for a hypothetical clearing in our schedule when we can finally grant ourselves the permission to simply exist. We have transformed our modern existence into a non-stop logistics operation, treating our days as a series of data packets to be processed, optimized, and evaluated for maximum efficiency. We look out at our colleagues, our competitors, and even our friends through the distorting lens of functional utility, evaluating every human relationship based on how it can enhance our performance or validate our forward momentum. To allow a single hour to pass without producing a measurable result, solving an organizational crisis, or consuming a piece of educational content feels to the modern mind like a catastrophic moral failure, a dangerous regression in a world that demands continuous upward trajectories. We wear our exhaustion like a pristine garment of honor, celebrating our crowded schedules and our sleep deprivation as absolute proof of our worth and dedication. We have convinced ourselves that our human value is directly compounded by our external results, and so we continue to wind the springs of our internal engine tighter day by day, hour by hour. We optimize our morning routines, we automate our nutrition, and we biohack our sleep cycles, entirely unaware that the very tools we are using to maximize our performance are the tools that are stripping our lives of all organic vitality. We are starving inside our own hyper-optimized kingdoms, dying of spiritual exhaustion from the relentless effort of proving a worth that can never be finalized by a milestone. This systemic acceleration turns our internal psychological reality into an intricate clockwork mechanism running exclusively on empty air. The mechanism is a masterpiece of modern design, its brass gears perfectly aligned, its jewels gleaming with precision, its components ticking with flawless synchronization. From the outside, it looks magnificent, powerful, and completely unstoppable, a model of high-performance human engineering. Yet, if we step inside the hidden chambers of this structure, we discover that the intricate gears are turning so rapidly that they are generating a devastating subterranean heat. The mechanism is spinning in a vacuum, completely disconnected from the deep soil of the present moment, driven entirely by the invisible wind of an underlying terror. There is no moisture in these brass rooms, no sound of laughter, and no fresh breeze moving through the components, because to allow a single pause or a moment of unstructured stillness would mean risking a complete structural collapse of our performance-based identity. We live in a state of perpetual velocity, guarding a treasury of accomplishments that is entirely devoid of deep internal peace, because we are too terrified to admit that the greatest threat to our survival is not failure, but the total exhaustion occurring within the engine itself. We see this same pattern of kinetic dispersal playing out in the collective rhythm of our modern living spaces and shared environments. We sit across from our loved ones at dinner tables, our bodies occupying the same physical room, yet our minds are miles apart. Wandering through the digital circuits of our professional responsibilities, or planning the logistics of the upcoming week. We have normalized a state of fractured presence, where every human interaction must be condensed into a brief transaction, and where a conversation is viewed as an obstruction to our optimization goals. We tell ourselves that we are building security, that we are securing our future, and that we are earning our eventual right to rest, but the body recognizes the profound cruelty of this deferred living. The physical framework speaks its protest through a burning sensation in the lining of the stomach, an automatic rolling forward of the shoulders, and a persistent restlessness that keeps our minds spinning long after the office lights have been extinguished. We are trying to force a fragile, beautiful biological entity to operate with the cold, unyielding, non-stop efficiency of an automated machine, and we are breaking our spirits in the process. Let us step back from the high-velocity circuit of this infinite loop for just a brief, intentional interlude. Let us sit together in the quiet clearing that opens up when we refuse to slice our attention into any more optimized blocks for public or professional consumption. We are not separate from the vast, open nature that functions so beautifully without a single metric, schedule, or performance review. The wild, uncultivated fields do not demand that their grasses grow. With mechanical uniformity, the soil permits every seed to open in its own season, expanding downward into the dark earth and upward into the wide sky without ever tracking its productivity. The great mountain rivers do not accelerate their currents to meet a corporate deadline. They flow with an innate, unhurried majesty, adapting to the rocks and valleys they encounter, perfectly complete within their own fluid volume at every turn of the channel. Only we, with our highly complex, anxious human intellects, have turned our life into a product and our presence into a performance. We have built a prison out of our own optimization metrics, locking ourselves inside a high-speed engine, and throwing away the key in our desperate pursuit of an external validation that can never be finalized in a world made of constant transformation. To begin the sacred process of uncoupling these frantic brass gears and allowing the tightly coiled springs to relax into a state of absolute completeness, we must first cultivate the rare courage of total, unblinking awareness. We must look directly at our addiction to productivity, not with judgment, frustration, or self-condemnation, but with the gentle, penetrating clarity of a physician examining an internal structural injury. We must allow the high-velocity glare of our digital fortress to dim, to feel the deep, heavy weight of the mental exhaustion we have been carrying behind our eyes, and to realize that the undivided stillness we have been running from is not our erasure, it is our only true sanctuary. As we sit here together, breathing into the tight, burning grid of our stomach muscles, letting the constriction in our shoulders soften, and allowing our weight to drop fully into the deep support of the earth beneath us, we are beginning the architecture of our own transformation. We are choosing to step out of the illusion of the infinite circuit and into the heavy, grounded reality of the only moment that has ever truly belonged to us. Right here, right now, in the absolute, unconditional center of our being. By simply allowing ourselves to witness the friction of our constant acceleration, the first gears begin to slow, and the scattered pieces of our mind begin their slow, graceful migration back home. To completely understand how this relentless momentum takes possession of our day-to-day experience, let us look at a highly specific human blueprint that populates every corner of our modern cities. Let us look closely at the archetype of the kinetic operator, a master of executive execution, a builder of complex commercial structures, and a student of rigorous personal growth who prides themselves on an unyielding, unbreakable work ethic. From the outside, our lives look like a spectacular masterclass in human capability and self-determination. We are the ones who cross the finish lines first, who sit in the quiet glow of latinite terminal gates answering urgent communications, and who constantly engineer solutions for every organizational vulnerability before it can disrupt our progress. We feel an intense defensive pride in our capacity to withstand pressure that would shatter a less disciplined mind. Yet, if we step past this impeccable armor and look inside the private, uncurated quarters of our internal world during the deep hours of the night, we encounter a terrifying structural void. We discover that we have become completely estranged from the very life we are working so hard to secure. Our massive, non-stop external production has become a highly sophisticated, subconscious defensive perimeter designed to outrun an underlying panic, an existential dread that whispers that if we ever slow down, if we ever stop achieving, we will discover that we are fundamentally empty and entirely irrelevant to the universe. This continuous velocity leaves a severe, microphysical signature embedded directly into the living tissue of our biological containers. When we live our lives with our internal clockwork tightly wound, our anatomy adapts by constructing a permanent, highly specialized grid of physical bracing. Let us trace this physical map of the hyper-optimized phantom as it tightens its grip on our muscles and nerves, starting from the upper neck and traveling deep into the center of our core. The most immediate manifestation of this achievement-driven identity lives directly within our celiac plexus, the burning solar plexus located right beneath the framework of our lower ribs. In a body that has transformed its existence into an ongoing performance, this nerve center operates in a state of permanent, acidic inflammation. It feels like a cold, dense, or burning knot that never fully uncoils. Every time we open a new professional project, every time we review our metrics, and every time we sense an unexpected gap in our upcoming schedule, this stomach center contracts with a sharp, evolutionary panic, as if the ground beneath our feet has suddenly vanished. We are running our biological organism on the high-octane fuel of stress hormones, forcing our internal organs to endure an ongoing chemical emergency to maintain our external metrics of success. This epigastric contraction pulls upward, locking the structural muscles of our neck and shoulder girdle into a permanent, subtle roll forward, a defensive alignment we can identify as the kinetic collar. We hold our shoulders elevated and slightly rounded, mimicking the exact somatic structure of a draft animal, leaning permanently into a heavy, unyielding leather harness. If you bring your awareness to the space between your shoulder blades in this moment, You can feel how the thoracic spine has frozen into an unbending, rigid column of bone and fascia. We have lost the capacity to twist, to bend, and to yield to the natural flow of our physical surroundings, because our back muscles are frozen in a continuous state of structural defense, as if we are physically holding up the entire weight of our corporate and personal empires. This rigidity travels into our skull, clamping the suboccipital nerves at the base of the brain and sending a persistent, low-grade neural friction across our temples. We lock our jaws to suppress our underlying boredom or terror, and we look out at the world through eyes that are wide, narrow, and aggressive, permanently searching the horizon for the next task to conquer or the next crisis to solve. The immediate consequence of this upper body bracing is that our respiratory system becomes completely disconnected from its natural grounding axis. Our inhalation hits the hard wall of our tense stomach and stops short, trapping our breath entirely within the shallow high chambers of the rib cage. This shallow chest flutter acts as a continuous silent engine of anxiety, keeping our amygdala trapped in a survival loop that constantly floods our bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. We are literally floating above the earth, running entirely on the nervous electricity of our exhaustion, unable to drop our physical weight down into our pelvis, our thighs, and our feet. We can sit on a luxurious chair in a silent room, yet our bodies are physically running a marathon, our hearts beating with an erratic, elevated rhythm, because we have forgotten how to allow our skeleton to rest against the support of the ground. We have become hyper-efficient ghosts living inside an increasingly numb biological home, entirely unaware that this chronic physical tension is the way our body protests against a lifestyle that treats our humanity as a machine to be optimized. The long-term psychological fallout of this somatic exhaustion is the arrival of a profound, paralyzing comparison fatigue that distorts our relationship with our own basic human limitations. Because we have spent years evaluating our worth through the lens of external metrics and polished public portfolios, we begin to develop a deep subterranean hatred for our natural, uncurated interior realities. We treat our moments of natural exhaustion, our slow mornings, and our quiet periods of sadness as dangerous moral defects that must be hidden away or aggressively eradicated through more self-improvement protocols. If a day passes where we have not achieved a measurable milestone or checked off a series of demanding tasks, a wave of intense existential guilt washes over our consciousness, making us feel as if we are fading into absolute invisibility. The digital and professional personas we built to protect ourselves have become our ultimate executioners, demanding that we sacrifice our real, breathing presence to keep their virtual reputations alive. We have built an exquisite cage out of our accomplishments, and we are sitting inside it, starving to death, because we believe that our next achievement will finally give us the permission to look ourselves in the eye and feel worthy of existing. This state of chronic internal acceleration inevitably poisons the quality of our modern relationships, converting our living spaces into a collection of isolated, transaction-oriented nodes. We sit across from our partners, our children, or our friends at dinner tables, sharing the same physical space and consuming the same food, yet our minds are miles apart, caught inside the high-speed circuits of our professional logistics, or planning the optimization strategies for the upcoming week. We have normalized a state of fractured presence, where every human interaction must be condensed into a brief, efficient transaction, and where a slow, unedited conversation is viewed as an annoying disruption to our optimized schedules. We have thousands of professional contacts and hundreds of digital connections, but we are suffocating from a profound, unprecedented loneliness because we no longer possess the somatic patience to look another human being in the eye and listen to their unvarnished reality without reaching for our pocket-sized displays to escape the discomfort of the present moment. The body recognizes the profound cruelty of this deferred living, speaking its protest through the cold numbness in our hands, the chronic clenching of our jaw, and the deep, hollow ache that remains behind our breastbone long after the world has gone to sleep. To break this vicious cycle of kinetic exhaustion and heal this systemic fragmentation, we cannot rely on the same driven, strategic intellect that has kept us running. We cannot cure an addiction to optimization by buying a better calendar app or enrolling in a more advanced time management course. We must seek a different kind of sight, a surgical diagnostic tool that can cut clean through our modern cultural conditioning and expose the foundational illusions that have left our bodies trapped in this high-speed circuit. We must find the rare and radical courage to step entirely out of the performance, to sit down in the bare dust with our unfiltered, unpolished self, and to examine the precise mechanism that makes us believe we are not enough as we stand. Only by looking directly into the hollow void at the center of our achievement-seeking mind can we begin to discover an unshakable, internal foundation that no longer asks permission from the world to exist, a unified center of gravity that remains completely still even when the digital and professional applause of the universe falls into absolute silence. The heavy sensation of running on a high-velocity hamster wheel, powered entirely by artificial expectations, does not merely disrupt our daily schedules, it points directly to a profound structural misunderstanding of how human consciousness operates. When we examine the intense friction of our modern work ethic under the clinical microscope of ancient Eastern psychology, we discover that our relentless pursuit of efficiency is driven by a deep-seated aversion to the present moment. More than 2 millennia ago, an awakened spiritual teacher sat upon the bare, uncultivated earth of a northern Indian forest and offered to his students a radical diagnostic framework that cuts clean through our contemporary illusions of productivity and self-improvement. He observed that when a human being encounters a challenging reality, a tight professional deadline, an unexpected financial shift, or a natural moment of physical exhaustion, they rarely suffer merely from the objective event itself. Instead, the untrained mind immediately projects a secondary sequence of mental commentary, resistance, and harsh self-judgment onto that original experience. He described this psychological phenomenon through the visceral image of the 2 arrows. The first arrow represents the raw, inescapable realities of being a biological creature inside a changing physical world, the neutral fact that projects require labor, that resources are finite, that our energy levels naturally fluctuate throughout the day, and that external market conditions are inherently volatile. This first arrow is an objective law of nature. It is sharp, but its wound is clean, localized, and entirely manageable. However, the moment that first arrow of natural limitations strikes our skin, our hypervigilant, performance-driven intellect reacts in a blind panic. We pull back a secondary internal bowstring and fire a second arrow directly into the exact same laceration. This second arrow is our internalized narrative of resistance, the toxic, self-inflicted story that our natural exhaustion is a moral failure, the prideful conviction that we must operate with the unyielding consistency of a machine, and the torturous belief that our basic human worth vanishes the moment we slow down our output. The teacher pointed out that while we may have very little control over the trajectory of the first arrow, the demands and unexpected disruptions of our modern environment, the secondary, agonizing puncture is entirely manufactured by our own minds. We are the ones pulling the bowstring. We are the ones shooting ourselves over and over again in the dark, transforming a simple, temporary moment of human fatigue into a lifetime of chronic, self-inflicted psychological fragmentation. When we apply this ancient diagnosis to our contemporary cult of hyper-optimization and achievement-based identity, we begin to realize that our profound emotional numbness and physical breakdown are not caused by our heavy workloads, but by the massive volume of psychological energy we expend weaponizing our productivity against our actual lived experiences. We have transformed the neutral, beautiful reality of our changing nature into a terrifying, existential enemy. In the natural order of things, a fluctuating state of energy is the very definition of a healthy living organism. A natural landscape does not produce fruit with non-stop, hyper-accelerated consistency. It retreats into the cold, silent stillness of winter to consolidate its resources before exploding into the vibrant growth of spring. Yet, because we have outsourced our sense of existence to our metrics, we treat our organic periods of rest as a fatal design flaw. The second arrow we shoot into our own chest is the prideful, exhausting story that we are a collection of commercial assets that must be continuously upgraded, streamlined, and validated by external data. The burning, acidic heat in the lining of our stomachs, the rigid posture of our kinetic collars, and the shallow chest flutter of our breath are the physical prices of our refusal to let our presence be non-functional, private, and rooted in the earth. We are using our own precious life force to keep our real self trapped in a high-speed cage of judgment, mistakenly believing that a frantic display of constant labor can somehow buy us a permanent exemption from the vulnerability of change. To completely dismantle this second arrow and begin the slow, graceful work of uncoupling the brass gears of our internal engine, we must penetrate even deeper into the architecture of the mind and expose the foundational illusion that sustains our addiction to endless labor, the myth of the solid, permanent, and separate self. We operate under the completely unquestioned assumption that inside our skulls sits a solitary, independent manager called the ego, a permanent controller who owns an identity, possesses time, and must aggressively defend their worth against the judgment of the world by accumulating visible achievements. We view the validation of our peers and the metrics of finite currency that we must constantly harvest to prove that we deserve to occupy space on this planet. But when we quiet our racing thoughts and investigate our immediate physical experience with microscopic precision, we find absolutely no evidence of this solid, isolated controller. Where is this independent producer located? Is it in the flashing light behind our eyes? Is it in the burning ache of our stomach center? When we observe our bodies closely, we find only a dynamic, ever-changing tapestry of breath, circulating blood, pulsing nerves, and wide-open awareness. There is no fixed wall inside our being. Our consciousness is not a border to be defended, but a vast, porous space that constantly mirrors the entire universe. The professional and personal personas we fight so hard to optimize are compounded phantoms built from temporary social trends, shifting economic climates, and artificial algorithms. When we realize that our separate, high-performing identity is a linguistic fiction, the entire strategy of validation addiction loses its logic. You cannot protect, upgrade, or optimize a clockwork engine if you realize that the engine, the operator, and the track are all made of the exact same undivided fabric of reality. This insight cuts through our modern glorification of toxic productivity and personal branding like an unyielding surgical blade. We have been conditioned to believe that to be successful means to be an unshakable monument of constant efficiency, a pristine machine that can weather any organizational storm without ever revealing a single blemish of exhaustion or doubt. But the ancient wisdom reminds us that an intricate mechanism running inside a vacuum is inherently fragile. The very rigidity and artificiality that make it look impressive ensure that the moment a sudden life crisis arrives, its internal friction will grind its components into dust. True strength does not look like a hyper-efficient clockwork engine. It looks like a deep, still pool of mountain water. Water is perfectly unified, Yet it has no fixed, rigid shape of its own. It reflects the highest peaks, the dark storm clouds, and the infinite stars exactly as they appear, adapting its form to whatever terrain it encounters without ever needing to hold on to a single image to prove its worth. When we stop shooting the second arrow of self-optimizing resistance, we begin the transition from a frantic machine to that still water. We realize that our frantic efforts to build a fortress of accomplishments do not protect us from the pain of insignificance. Our frantic efforts are our insignificance. The act of passing our life into optimized blocks for an anonymous market is far more painful than the act of turning off the displays, letting the performance die, and allowing our real, breathing body to touch the solid ground. Consider the profound psychological and somatic relief that enters our collective consciousness when this illusion of a separate, performance-driven self begins to dissolve. When we accept that we are fundamentally complete within our own being, the hyper-vigilant ocular grid behind our eyes can finally begin to unclamp. The suboccipital muscles at the base of our skull can release their evolutionary grip because we are no longer balancing the weight of an artificial empire on our neck. The solar plexus can relax its twisted, burning knot expanding outward with a raw, authentic volume, because we are no longer treating every professional metric or unread email as a matter of biological life or death. We see that our lifelong habit of constant acceleration was not a virtue or a requirement for modern survival, but a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to protect a phantom ego that never existed in the first place. The ancient Eastern teachings invite us to step out of this high-speed loop and realize that our radical completeness is not an achievement we must unlock in the future, is our absolute, natural birthright. To be whole does not mean to be perfectly praised by the world. It means to have a mind that is unified enough, still enough, and brave enough to rest in its own house, completely self-contained and deeply at peace with its own unedited reality. By surrendering our need for external validation, we are not fading into irrelevance. We are finally discovering an unshakable inner gravity, a power that is rooted not in our visibility to others, but in our absolute, undivided presence to ourselves. To bridge the immense chasm between this sharp philosophical diagnosis and the raw reality of our daily existence, we must construct a practical, somatic laboratory, a precise architectural blueprint for the body and mind that does not depend on fleeing our daily schedules, but on radically altering our relationship to attention. We cannot simply contemplate the concept of inherent completeness. We must physically weave it into our sinews, our solar plexus, and our breath. The clockwork engine running on empty air was built block by block through decades of unconscious structural conditioning, and it must be dissolved through an intentional daily discipline of recollection. We must train our attention to refuse the temptation of constant kinetic acceleration, learning to return our consciousness to a state of absolute unburdened presence. This requires converting our everyday actions, the way we sit at our desks, the way we speak, and the way we breathe, into a sacred forge where the heavy, brass gears of our inherited performance personas are dissolved by the steady, unyielding heat of embodied mindfulness. The foundational entry point of this transformative architecture requires us to address the burning, acidic heat of the epigastric region that has locked our core into a permanent state of high-pressure survival. The first practical discipline we must carry into our waking life is a somatic repatterning technique we can identify as the solar-slowing breath. Whenever you notice your mind beginning to race with future tasks, or whenever you feel that distinct, tightening heat gathering right beneath your rib cage midday, you must train yourself to halt your busy activity. Sit flat on a chair, with your feet pressed firmly against the ground, establishing a heavy, unshakable connection with the earth. Place both of your palms directly over your solar plexus, right beneath your breastbone, feeling the solid warmth of your own skin. On your next inhalation, draw the air slowly and deeply through your nose, but intentionally bypass the tense, high chambers of your chest. Force the breath to slide all the way down into your lower abdomen, expanding your belly directly against the pressure of your hands like a heavy canvas sail catching a deep wind. Hold this deep expansion for 3 seconds, feeling the absolute volume of your presence inside the room. Then open your mouth slightly and let the air escape as a long, slow, and completely effortless sigh, allowing your abdominal wall to drop back naturally toward your spine. As you release the breath, imagine a cool, refreshing wave of water pouring directly into the burning furnace of your stomach, extinguishing the frantic embers of anxiety and soothing the overworked nerves of your core. Practice this sequence 3 times in succession. Whenever you feel the phantom speed of the engine accelerating, you are performing a profound energetic restoration, rebuilding the internal foundation that was dismantled by your constant search for public or professional validation. You are teaching your body that your existence is not a gaseous phantom that must be sustained by endless labor, but a solid, heavy, and independent mountain of reality that remains perfectly stable whether the outside world looks at it or not. As the burning knot in the core begins to cool, we must immediately direct our attention upward to dismantle the kinetic collar that has locked our neck, shoulders, and spine into a permanent harness of overfunctioning. This is achieved through the practice of the weight drop descent. The shoulders are the literal executioners of our achievement-driven identity, rounding forward to push us into the next task, before the current moment has even finished unfolding. To reclaim your physical alignment, dedicate 3 minutes during every transition period of your day, the micro moments between meetings, before answering a phone call, or right as you sit down to eat. Perform a total skeletal inventory. Close your eyes, unlock your lower jaw so that your teeth are slightly parted, and take a long, slow inhalation down into your pelvis. As you exhale, consciously drop the full, gravitational weight of your arms, your collarbones, and your shoulder blades away from your skull, letting them hang heavily toward the earth. Imagine the tight, fibrous tissue between your shoulder blades, softening like ice melting under a warm sun, allowing your thoracic spine to settle back into its natural, unforced alignment. Feel the immense relief of allowing the earth to hold up your skeleton, realizing that you do not need to brace your muscles against gravity to prove you are worthy of occupying space. By performing this physical descent multiple times a day, you break the addictive cycle of kinetic reaching. You are proving to your nervous system that it can afford to be heavy, soft, and still without losing its capacity to function. And you are training your body to return to its original nature, not as a draft animal pulling an invisible plow, but as an open, relaxed channel through which life can flow without friction. This physical grounding prepares us to face the psychological mechanism of the achievement mirage through the implementation of the gap-dwelling discipline. We have conditioned our minds to run a frantic script of constant optimization, treating every empty moment in our day as a vacuum that must be instantly filled with a device, a task, or a strategy. To shatter this delusion, you must establish a non-negotiable mental discipline whenever a gap appears in your schedule. The moment a meeting ends early, a web page takes a moment to load, or you are waiting in a physical line, do not reach into your pocket for your display, and do not begin planning the upcoming hour. Instead, remain exactly where you are, drop your weight down into your feet, and tune your senses to the space between the notes of your life. Listen closely to the ambient sounds of the environment around you, the distant murmur of traffic, the hum of air conditioning, or the sound of someone breathing nearby. Notice the raw, unedited texture of the air against your skin. Initially, when you introduce this practice, The calculating intellect will experience an immediate withdrawal crisis, flooding your consciousness with a wave of intense restlessness, boredom, and a terrifying feeling of insignificance. The ego will whisper that you are falling behind, that you are wasting precious time, and that your value is eroding. Do not fight these anxious thoughts, and do not succumb to their momentum either. Treat them as the natural, superficial noise of an engine that is winding down. Sit directly in the fire of your boredom, breathing deeply into your solar plexus, and watch the craving for speed rise, peak, and dissolve into the vast, open silence of the room. By staying present through this discomfort without seeking an escape, you are reclaiming your sovereignty. You are proving to the mind that you can exist in a gap without falling apart. And you are discovering the exquisite luxury of a presence that is completely self-contained and free from the mandate of production. This private reclamation naturally expands into our professional environments through the continuous discipline of the unified focus. Modern culture has glorified the practice of mental fragmentation, training us to live our lives as a perpetual performance where we are constantly tracking multiple streams of data simultaneously. This constant division of attention is the precise mechanism that turns our consciousness into a collection of scattered, brittle gears. The practice of the unified focus demands that you do exactly one thing at a time, with absolute, unyielding devotion. When you write an email, close every other tab on your browser, silence your phone, and let your intellect become a single, concentrated laser beam that illuminates that specific paragraph until it is completed. When you listen to a colleague or a client, let the entire universe compress itself down into the single landscape of their face, their voice, and their presence, without planning your next response or checking the clock. When your attention inevitably drifts toward the digital horizons, it will do thousands of times. Do not react with anger, frustration, or self-criticism. The moment you become aware that your mind has fractured, you have already broken the spell of the illusion. Simply accept the drift as a natural habit of the modern mind. Pick up the scattered thread of your attention and return it gently, firmly, and immediately to the single task at hand. This continuous, patient gathering of attention acts as a powerful magnetic force that pulls the scattered shards of your consciousness back into a unified center. You begin to see that efficiency and peace are not achieved by being everywhere at once, but by being entirely in the one place where reality is actually happening. You eliminate the exhausting cognitive friction of anticipation, and you find that a unified mind is naturally quiet, naturally powerful, and completely invulnerable to the comparison fatigue that destroys the uncentered spirit. Through the integration of these four practical architectures, the cooling of the solar plexus, the descent of the skeletal weight, the sovereign habitation of the gaps, and the radical concentration of the unified focus, we systematically uncouple the frantic brass gears of the clockwork engine and melt them back down into a single pristine pool of consciousness. We are no longer treating our minds as a factory that must be continuously optimized for the market, because we have uncovered the absolute emptiness of the achievement ego. We see that our addiction to productivity was a symptom of a deep somatic amnesia moment where we forgot how to feel the baseline completeness of our own breathing body. As these disciplines transition from voluntary efforts into automatic habits of our nervous system, a profound, unshakable peace begins to establish itself in the center of our lives. The frantic acceleration of the kinetic operator slows to a complete stop. The hypervigilant scanning of the eyes relaxes, and the mind learns to rest deeply within its own home, fully contained, perfectly whole, and utterly undivided. We are no longer searching for ourselves in the metrics of the outside world, because we have returned to the deep, silent well of our own being, a well that remains completely full even when the rest of the universe is completely empty. When these modern mental disciplines and structural somatic anchorings are integrated into the fabric of our daily lives, a profound and quiet revolution takes place within the laboratory of our human existence. The frantic, unyielding momentum of the kinetic operator mentality that once defined our reality begins to stall, its massive, unyielding stone gates dropping open to the moist evening air, allowing the entire structure to settle heavily and authentically into the landscape beneath it. We find ourselves standing on the threshold of a completely unmapped psychological territory, a state of consciousness we can recognize as radical completeness. In this realized state, the cold wind of life does not stop blowing, our past histories are not magically erased, and the social contracts of our daily interactions do not suddenly disappear. Instead, our fundamental relationship to these phenomena is completely turned inside out. We discover the rare and unshakable baseline of a human being who has ceased to treat open spaces as a structural threat. We step off the parapet of perpetual vigilance and plant our bare feet onto the solid, fertile earth of our immediate existence, feeling the immense relief of someone who has finally stopped running from their own soft beating heart. This new state of consciousness brings with it a distinct physical and mental landscape, a spacious clarity that can be felt in the very marrow of our bones. The epigastric region, which once held the tight, burning memory of a structural shield, now exhibits a supple, resilient expansion, bowing forward with every inhalation to receive the world without a single barrier. The respiratory diaphragm moves with an effortless, fluid cadence, expanding fully into the deep belly and dropping away into a state of profound stillness on the exhalation. There is no longer a constant, emergency-level chemical signal firing through our nervous system. The internal arches have been permanently dismissed from their stations. The electric defensive buzzing that once occupied the jaw and the space behind our eyes dissolves into a cool, luminous clarity, leaving the mind feeling like a vast sunlit clearing after a heavy summer rain, deep, quiet, and capable of holding whatever life presents without shutting down. When we look at our schedules, our projects, or our emotional scars from this space, we no longer see them as entry points for an invader. We see them as the very places where our life connects with the lives of others, rich channels of mutual exchange that we can engage with joy and dedication, without ever believing we must defend an isolated ego to remain safe. In this space of absolute presence, we begin to clearly hear the echo of the teacher's final, urgent guidance delivered over 2 millennia ago, beneath the shade of the twin trees, as his own biological form prepared to dissolve back into the elements. He did not leave his followers with a set of rigid, external dogmas to protect them from the vulnerability of the world, nor did he offer them a magical sanctuary outside of nature. Instead, he looked at the weeping assembly and reminded them that every compounded thing in this universe must eventually change, decay, and pass away, and that their ultimate liberation lay in striving for their own awakening with unremitting mindfulness. He called upon them to be islands unto themselves, to be their own lamps and their own ultimate refuge, seeking no external security, but rather anchoring themselves in the unconditioned, spacious nature of awareness itself. This final message is not a somber reminder of loss, it is a magnificent, triumphant declaration of the infinite potential of human consciousness. It is a reminder that we do not need to build stone walls to find absolute safeties, because the very nature of what we are, the silent, open space that holds the changing current, cannot be broken, cannot be compromised, and cannot be destroyed by the touch of the world. We realize, with a deep and quiet humility, that the vulnerability we spent our entire lives fleeing from was never a design flaw in our humanity. The softness of our hearts was simply life itself, seeking to remain fluid, expressive, and deeply connected to the larger ecological network that sustains us. The calcified fortress we constructed out of our achievements, our hyper-independence, and our emotional containment was the only thing keeping us separate from the warmth we were starving to receive. By allowing those stone walls to weather away, by dropping our weapons, and by refusing to fire a single secondary arrow of prideful resistance into our own wounds, we have allowed ourselves to return to the forest of the world. We are no longer isolated guards trying to survive a self-imposed siege. We are an organic part of the clearing, growing out of the same soil, breathing the same air, and sharing our strength with every living creature across the infinite web of time. The heavy armor has melted, the gate is open, and we are finally completely and exquisitely alive in the only moment we will ever possess. As the cold, artificial grey of the world outside transitions into the quiet sanctuary of the present hour, and as the echo of this ancient wisdom begins to settle into the soft tissue of your body, let yourself sit in the boundless clearing that remains. Feel the heavy, mineral weight of your bones resting upon the surface of this rotating earth, and notice the long, slow, effortless rise and fall of your breath as it expands your unprotected chest. You are here, you are open, and the entire universe is flowing through the soft center of your being without a single shield to stop it. If you truly stop trying to protect your identity from the touch of other human beings, and if you completely surrender the exhausting illusion that strength is found in your absolute isolation, what is actually left in your life that is not already completely safe, completely connected, and completely free?